22-year-old me decided this was the right thing to do for me. End a relationship, but said this is something I have to do because I wouldn't have been the person that I am today if I didn't make that decision.
What did you feel you were going to get by making this change?
The best thing you can ever do for your growth is move away from your home city. Put yourself in different environments where you don't feel comfortable is where you're going to find the most growth. The best MBA, the best education you can get is to go travel so you can understand how different parts of the world and people operate.
How has your travel impacted or influenced the work that you do today?
The biggest thing that I've been able to take through my travels is that
what if the only thing standing between you and your greatest potential is the perfect life you've already built? At 23, Chris March walked away from a professional basketball career and a long-term relationship to move halfway across the world with nothing but a backpack and bed sheets. Today, Chris is an executive advisor to 8-figure founders, teaching a global language of leadership he calls the Travel MBA. If you've ever felt stuck in your hometown or trapped by the expectations of others, this conversation on the power of being uncomfortable is for you. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dwayne. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. Chris, when people hear your story, they often hear the travel, the countries. I know I did just before we started recording here, your career ultimately. But what I'm more interested in is the moment before all that. So you're 23, you're in Sydney, Australia, and you make a decision to leave what's familiar to move to London without knowing how it's all going to work out. So take me back there. What was happening inside you when you made that choice?
A lot of it was seen through my best friend at the time. His sister had recently returned from London. And for anyone who's listening who's from Australia or who has any interactions with Australians, our rite of passage is to live in London or the UK in some capacity because Australians migrated from the UK. Our ancestors are from England, Ireland, that part of the world. So it really is seen as something that you have to do. And when I think about my close friends at school from Sydney, we all lived in the UK at some point in time. So my friend and I, Blake, we made a decision that we were going to follow in the footsteps of his older sister at that point in time. So it felt like the right thing for us to do. And to put you in perspective, at that point in time, when I grew up, I wanted to be a professional basketball player. I played at a semi-professional level for my early 20s. And up until that point, I thought I was going to be an NBA player. Or not, I wasn't going to go to the NBA. I was going to play in the National Basketball League, which is the professional league here. I played in the off-season semi-pro league here as well. That didn't pan out. I was in a relationship which was going strong, probably my first really true love. And for whatever reason, I decided this was something that I just had to do. My life could have been completely different. And I was chatting with a friend about this last night. If I decided just to stay in Australia, I'd probably be married with multiple kids with that partner at this point in time. But 22-year-old me decided this was the right thing to do for me. End a relationship. I had to end a relationship. Yes.
So you ended the relationship to make this decision.
Yes. I ended this relationship and said, this is something I have to do. Unfortunately, you will not be coming with me because it doesn't make sense where this is something I have to do with my friends. This is part of my journey and you're not going to be part of that. This is where our relationship ends. So that forthright that I had at that point was huge. And I commend myself for that because I wouldn't have been the person that I am today if I didn't make that decision. Full sliding door moment. So that was what it really came down to. I recognize the end of a relationship. This is something that I have to do. This is going to help me grow. I didn't realize the domino effect it would have after I spent 2 years there. I wasn't sure if it was going to be 12 months, 18 months, but I knew intrinsically this is something that you have to do for yourself right now. It may be strange. It may be uncomfortable. You're not really sure what you're doing. And I think back to that time, I wasn't really that responsible at all. I remember I had a backpack, a literal backpack. And I had bed sheets that I think my grandmother had given me. and I had a suit to apply for jobs and not much else in maybe a few random clothes, some shoes, and that was it. And I just decided to go with that backpack, my good friend and myself. Off we went to London. We flew via Japan. I remember we had a night stopover in Japan. No one spoke a word of English, and that was the start of our journey. And it had a huge effect on the rest of my life. So that's why I made the decision, and it was a huge, huge decision to say the least at that point in time.
Chris, a lot of people are very reluctant to leave securities such as, your home,
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah.
Obviously, I really want to dive into the what that conversation must have been like. I could imagine the emotion. What did you feel you were going to get by making this change? Like there must have been something very compelling.
The compelling part was the internal driver was that I knew growth came through being uncomfortable. And I've written a post about this previously, where in short, it says the best thing you can ever do for your growth is move away from your home city. Even if you say you're from LA, you move to New York, or you're from Toronto, you move to Vancouver, or if you want to take it even further, move to another country. Put yourself in different environments where you don't feel comfortable is where you're going to find the most growth. And that's where I commend myself for having that vision in a lot of ways to be this is going to help you grow. At 23, I still was figuring out life. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. My career, what I thought my career was going to be, professional basketball player, had not panned out the way I thought it was. So realistically, I thought next step, go see the world, figure things out. What is that going to give you by doing and putting yourself in that environment? And I think that's what really helped expedite me grow as a person and put myself in such better positions to become more aware of who I was.
Was that your goal to understand yourself better? Was that the objective for this?
It was just to go, to be honest, Dwayne, it was to go have fun, go party, go see the world. I at that point, I think I'd left Australia once, so I wasn't well traveled by any means at that point. So it was really a step into the unknown, and no bigger unknown than moving from Sydney to literal other side of the world, 24-hour flight away. So it was just me saying, let's see where this will take us. You're going to move with your friends. I also knew that I had some other friends moving over. They cascaded of when they had arrived, and it was just, let's go see the world. Let's party. Let's have fun.
Okay, so I'm going to try to be aligned with you. I'm trying to understand this. So you read something that talked about growth is going to help you, grow, moving away or going somewhere else or traveling is going to help your growth. Then you said, your main goal at that point was just to see the world and party. So I'm trying to connect the dots here. Like, was your desire just to move away and have fun? And you were wanting to grow more in the social party aspect, or was there something more deeper inside that was your calling?
I think it was more of a calling for me just to go have fun, truly. I don't think it was too deep at that age because I was 23. I was still figuring out life.
Yeah.
This was just to be seen as go have fun. We'll see what lands afterwards. And the growth part came afterwards. And many years later, I wrote the article about the growth that happened through that first exercise that I did, that I'm talking about moving to London and putting yourself in different environments. So when I think back at those times, I don't think it was that deep. I just think it was, all right, let's go have fun and see what happens. But I knew it was compelling enough to end a relationship, which was huge, and the career that I had chased hadn't quite worked out. So it was, okay, what life path will follow me after this?
What did follow you after that?
So I came back and I pivoted into after 2 years, and I had an incredible, incredible time. And I thought about staying. I had some honest conversations with girls at work who were saying, well, look, if you want to stay, you can marry me. And morally, I couldn't do that to my grandmother. A lot of people at that time were doing those type of things to stay in the country. And I was like, this doesn't work for me internally. My integrity cannot support that. So I begrudgingly moved back to Australia, and I knew at that point that I had to keep moving, and I enjoyed traveling and the experience that I had. And I wanted to feel as if I was still traveling. So I moved to a different part of Sydney to have that transient feel, to be around people who were traveling. And then within pretty much a short period of time of being back in Australia, I booked a one way to Vancouver a year later. And after living in the UK and living in Europe and traveling extensively, I moved into working in travel because during that time that we were in the UK and Europe, I was the person who designed where we would go to next. I would sit down and go, we're in London. We can go to Paris for the weekend, or we can go to here for the weekend. And I designed all these trips. I proposed them, and I enjoyed doing that. So following those 2 years of designing and going on all these multiple trips, I then pivoted into travel, which turned into a 17 and a half year career.
What was the exposure like? So it sounds like, you had an intention when you left.
Mm-hmm.
There was this idea that you wanted to go out and you wanted to see the social scene and just be social and meet people, etc. Then it sounds like you caught something different in that exploration. You're exposed to something. What did you realize you were being exposed to? Like, where did you see yourself growing? And how did that decision look like 2 years later when you came back from, versus the year that you made it when you left?
I think you're at that age, you're naive in a lot of different ways. And when you're traveling, you feel almost invincible. I would put it in a lot of different ways at that age. When you're young, naive, you just put yourself in different scenarios, and the excitement of you being and meeting new people gives you energy. And I think that attracts. I'm a big believer in energy. You draw energy from people. And when you go into these exotic places, which you've probably only seen on TV growing up in Australia, going to Spain, going to Ibiza, going to the Greek islands, and going to all these incredible places and rubbing shoulders with different people gave energy. And I just loved that energy that you got from it and being in those environments. So when I finally had to return to Australia, it was, how do I find that energy again? And how do I continue that energy? So that was really the focus, that I'd found something that I felt that was really aligned with me. And I think that was my calling now that we're talking about it. When I go back 2 years earlier, I was trying to find something which I was obsessed about in the best possible way when it came to basketball. When I focused on basketball, it was my whole life. I trained every day. I worked out every day. I did everything towards that goal. And then I found my next passion, and which cascaded my next 17-year career, was through travel. So when I came back, I decided to move into travel. And that was the inflection point for me to build my own career and then pivot and move to Canada.
Interesting. You started very young traveling, and at some point, I'm assuming, and maybe now you've slowed down,
Yeah.
have planted a little bit more roots, etc. And we typically do that. And not saying everybody does or you have to, but let's say.
Mm.
But most people live in the inverse,
Mm-hmm.
where they don't do a lot of traveling, or let's just say they don't make those big decisions at a very young age. And then later on, they want to make those decisions,
Yeah.
but they have too many routes.
Yeah.
So, based on your experience, what would you say to somebody who's in the inverse situation, who's saying, I want to make a change right now in my life, but I have so much obligation, so much roots here. How do I do it?
The older we get, the harder it is to do that. And I felt that as someone who's moved across country, just recently moved from Toronto, Canada, back to Australia to be closer to my family. There's always going to be obligations and things that are going to hold you down. And one of the lessons that I've learned is everyone is different. And I look at myself and my sister, we're well traveled, and my brother, we tried to push my brother to be that same person, to be someone who would explore and travel and see the world, but he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be a family person, and that's okay. For you individually, whatever your version of getting uncomfortable can look like, that's completely up to you. It's just important for you to identify what can happen when you put yourself in those scenarios. So it could be you just want to push yourself and go travel to around Australia. Let's say you want to go do something like that. Taking the time to understand that we wait for the perfect time, and perfect doesn't always happen, right? It's a lot of it's built around procrastination. Imperfect action is going to be the perfect time for you to take action. If I waited, I could have continued to stay in Canada and waited for the right time to return back to Australia, but I knew this was the time to come back to spend time. If I waited, I could still be there. So, really, the best thing you can do if you want to commit to something is by putting a date behind it, and everything will work out. You've got to trust yourself that things will work out. It always will if you put yourself in that scenario. So, it's about trusting self. And I think a lot of it comes around why you don't want to do it is because you don't trust the outcome, or it's uncomfortable that you have to put yourself in a situation where the fear of the unknown. But as someone who's done it many times, that's where the excitement is. You just got to put yourself in that first step forward and then follow through from there. So really put some commitments around it, whatever your version of that first step looks like it. And then from there, follow through. And it's not meaning you have to need to spend a year overseas. Maybe it's 2 months or 2 weeks. Just do it is the key. Just do it for yourself.
Why is that immersion in different communities, societies, cultures, countries? Why is that immersion important?
Because it allows you to understand different perspectives. I think the greatest lesson that I ever taught myself was to go and travel. The best MBA you can get is to go travel. The best education you can get is through travel so you can understand how different parts of the world and people operate. We have so many different cultures. The beauty in that is understanding how people operate in Canada or Austria or the UK. Everyone has different cultures and you can learn from that. And I think what's made me a well-rounded people person, and you look at people that have extensively traveled, a lot of what has built them and constructed who you are is based on the experiences you've had. So you can stay where you are, and that's okay, and build based on the people that you're around. But if you want to construct yourself differently and blend different parts, you can travel and see the world, which will help you see things through a different lens and it'll give you a greater appreciation around life.
So, where would this benefit somebody in their life?
Travel is appreciation for the way of other people live. And I think that's, as I've said all along, I think you can learn a lot about yourself, learn a lot about others, and the better you understand self, the better you can turn up for yourself as a leader. And when people hear that, they're going to say, "Well, I need a title to be a leader." No, Dwayne, you're a leader to your partner, your kids, if you have any, to your nieces, your nephews, your community, if you run any sports or whatever you do in your local community as well. So it's about turning up at that best version of yourself. And I feel 100% aligned that travel is the vehicle to help you become a better version of yourself.
What was your biggest epiphany about yourself through all the travel you've done?
Is that the best the best way to learn about yourself is to put yourself in uncomfortable scenarios, and that could be different varying degrees. It also means that the world is a lot bigger than we think and also a lot smaller than we think. So
Hmm.
the best way to learn is to ask questions and to be curious and to engage yourself with different people and walks of life. So those conversations are some of the most cherished relationships that I have through different people that I've met, and I now have friends in different parts of the world.
What comes to mind when you talk about putting yourself in difficult situations as you travel? Because the first thing I think about is it being something that people are a little bit averse to because it's like, I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to be in those difficult situations. Although those are the situations that will help you grow through, like you said, self exploration.
Mm.
Give us a story. Do you have a story or a situation that really stood out where you learned a lot about yourself in that moment?
Well, taking myself back to those 2005 times, for anyone that remembers those times, there was no social media, there was no maps, there was no way to recognize where you were, and you couldn't Google where were the best places to go out or to go to clubs or bars. So a big part of what helped me in that first time traveling was that you had to engage in conversations. And I think as society, we've lost a lot of that due to social media, right? We're all addicted to our phones. I can admit to that as well. And we self-soothe with our phones. We have a device which is essentially a laptop in our pocket, and we don't need to engage in people. And what happened back in that time, we didn't have that luxury. So we had to have conversations with everyone, ask for good restaurants, where to go, and engage with as many people as possible. So I found myself, even if when we were going to different destinations, we try to learn a little bit of the language, just enough to be, hello, how are you? Where's the bathroom, washroom? Where would you recommend to go out? So these were skills that we embedded in ourselves to help us get comfortable. And if you step into a culture and people see that you're putting in an effort to speak in their native tongue, they're more likely inclined to engage with you. So I think when I look back, that really gave me the confidence and the people I was traveling with to have those conversations. And we had so many good nights just by meeting local people and saying, Dwayne, where should we go out tonight? What would you recommend? And then the conversation will go, well, have you ever gone here? We can meet you there later. We'll be there at 6 o'clock. And though how many times we would have a similar story like that would happen every time we pretty much traveled, because it was just simpler and we didn't have the access to phones or social media, or the internet really was very minimal back then as well.
But now that we have all that access and all that information in front of us, especially for yourself being a traveler, do you use that those devices now, or do you still feel you communicate like you did in 2005 when you travel?
I'll be fair with this. Yes and no. And yes, that I'm not afraid to have a conversation. If I see someone on the street, I always say, hello, how are you? That's just who I am. But no, I think we're naturally wired. I had a recent trip where I traveled through Southeast Asia. We did Thailand, Philippines, Bali on the way here. And I think we naturally looked at places of where to go out through our smartphones. We did have some local conversations, but I think naturally we just inclined to use social media. We'll use Google to look at the best places. We'll look at reviews. So I think naturally just inclined, and that's the way society has lent itself to. But I try to remind myself and leave my phone at home whenever I go out for dinner and have conversations and meet people, because that's where the best lessons and best conversations naturally come from.
Well, it sounds like you have the foundation because you were doing it 20 years ago. So for you, even though you may not do it as much, you still have the capacity and the ability to do it in a moment. So that takes us to the work that you're doing right now. You've traveled over 80 plus countries. You've had a lot of life lessons through immersion and integration in different cultures and societies. So what is the work that you're doing now? If you could tell everybody the profession you're in right now, and how has your travel, that immersion, impacted or influenced the work that you do today?
Mm-hmm. So I do a couple of things. So firstly, I'm working here with 6, 7, 8 figure founders in Australia where we help them scale their businesses. So I'm an executive advisor to those businesses to help them scale. And then I also work for my own practice where I'm an executive coach and a leadership developer, where I work one-on-one mostly with clients and also organizations to help scale their businesses. So a lot of that work and the passion that I do there comes from leadership. I I worked in leadership for a number of years and something that I feel extremely passionate about. And I believe leadership is an absolute privilege. And I've seen leadership over the many, many years that I've worked with people that is used positively and also not in the greatest way as well. So that leadership discipline has really followed through from my own journey through the basketball world that I was in and that discipline there. And I've really taken that mindset of discipline, execution, consistency, the compounding nature of that from basketball and put that into the professional world. And that has allowed me to get to a pretty senior level and then worked into my own career that I do have now, working directly with organizations and leaders. And I think the biggest thing that I've been able to take through my travels is that foundationally, leadership is conceptual. However, people are global. And what I mean by that is people naturally want to be seen, heard, and valued. I've worked with different people across many different cultures. It can be a different perspective of how leadership is managed from the leader, but how people want to be led is the exact same in the culture. People want to be seen, heard, and valued on its most simplest level. And if you can be very focused on that with all the people that you have the privilege of leading, you can be an effective leader, because in a lot of different ways, I believe we've overcomplicated leadership to be this big grand thing, and there's all these different ways to accomplish leadership. Simplicity is always the most effective way to yield outcomes and to help people move forward.
How do you know people want to be feel heard and valued?
Ask them. Because naturally, when you think about yourself, right? So what do you want to be seen, heard, and valued. So naturally, we want to be seen. You want to be seen as an individual. What I mean by that, Dwayne, is that you want to be seen as a person and as a contributor that turns up to work every single day.
Okay.
If you and I are having a conversation, Dwayne, what's your motivation to come into work every day? It could be family, it could be monetary reasons. What are you contributing to? What's the mission here at this organization that we're at? Why do you feel that you're a part of that? To be heard is to ask the questions of being able to sit down with you and say, Dwayne, how are we doing as an organization? What do you think that I should be doing in my role that I'm not currently doing? That means you're being heard. You're being heard. You're being allowed to give it a platform where people could be heard to give their own perspective. Because I look at it from a perspective of everyone has a different perspective. We see a beach ball differently. You look at a beach ball, there's all these different layers that you have of a beach ball. Each of us have a unique perspective that we can give that we don't see. So what is that perspective, and how can you validate that person to be heard? And to be valued is asking them, what is it that they do to come into work every single day? What are we doing to align with that? Is it you, Dwayne, you wanted to buy a condo or a house in Toronto in 6-12 months' time? What can we do to support that? What can we do as an organization? What can I do to help you achieve that? Not only help you be more effective at your role, what can we do outside of that to ensure that you're valued? And do you feel that you're valued in the work that you do every single day? And if not, how can I help you get there?
So is this something that you coach and mentor other leaders on, business owners on?
Mm-hmm. This may come up naturally, and I think it's a framework that I do discuss with different leaders. It is naturally, when we strip down people, that's how we want to operate. So it's about being people first when it comes to leadership, and being people first as an organization. And that's where effective leadership comes in, and that's where a lot of the work that I do comes into it.
You've had a lot of different leaders respond to you differently with this, being at different, let's say, journeys, different places in their journey when it comes to understanding that people-centric type leadership. What have you found has been the most common, I guess, gap when it comes to leaders being at that people-centric place, as you just articulated, with being seen, heard, and valued, and not being there? What's the most common gaps you're seeing?
People don't care about people. That's what it comes down to. I've seen people, this is not uncommon. Anyone who's worked in large corporations, people are put into roles because they're a great salesperson, let's say, for example, or they're a great performer in their respective discipline or area of the business. Doesn't always mean they're going to be effective leaders or managers. So a lot of it just comes naturally to care. And I'm sure you hear it in your own circles as well, Dwayne, where people are not effective or just don't seem to really give people time or respect people's time to be heard. So we just look at the fundamentals of what are you doing to support people, how you support them, and how can you best show up for them as well. And if you're not naturally wired to care about what other people think, then you won't. So it's important, if you're not naturally inclined to be a people-centric leader, then we have to work on how do we get you as close as possible to that, because we all do things innately versus learned behaviors. So what can we do to learn a new behavior that can get you closer to the style of leadership that your business needs and also that the people need to perform at their best?
I'm going to assume you don't have an exact percentage on this, but of the leaders you worked with and the business owners that you've worked with, what percentage of them are people centric versus the ones that just don't care about people? And for the ones who don't care about people, how do you work with them?
It's a great question. And I wouldn't be able to give you an exact number. I would say, thinking about it objectively, I would say most people do care about the people that they work with, but there's always a percentage of people that don't. I would say 80% of people do care, and there's probably 10 to 20% that do not. And how you can observe that is by spending time with people and seeing how they operate. So some of the times I will go into an organization and sit with a new executive and help them embed the style that they need to be an executive, have an executive presence, and I'll see how they interact with their team. And pretty quickly, you can see how they interact, what they give time to, what they give attention to. Is it performative, or is it based around having a people-centric approach? So observing is a natural way to do that. And the way you talk and communicate to people, even when people are not watching, is a big way to see that. So an example I can think of naturally is, do you sit in your office by yourself and close the door all day? That's a psychological barrier that you're putting up to say, this is my time, this is my office, please do not come in here. And I see that. I've sat in different offices, and pretty much that's been the first couple of days where we sit there and it's closed door. People do not come in. The leader will come out and address the people as they see fit. That's not people leadership. That's a dictatorship almost.
It's interesting you talk about that because it tells me that there are some leaders out there that are people centric, but there are some leaders out there that are not. And it's scary to think that they're in a leadership position and they don't really care about people. They may be more monetary focused and more business centric, focusing on that aspect. People are numbers. So what is that feeling like when you're working with that 10-20%? Like, what goes through your mind, your heart when you're dealing with those types of leaders?
Yeah, it's more common than you think. And for me, who takes a lot of ownership and privilege in my leadership as well, I feel the same. I'm always shocked. Of course, I don't verbalize that, but that's why I'm able to do the work that I do. I'm brought in from different organizations to work with people to become more effective leaders and to create more leadership development disciplines through training, through courses. So it's about understanding why people are wired that way. And I think it naturally comes down to understanding how they are as a person and how they turn up as a leader, and helping them firstly become aware of it. We talk about self-leadership as we did earlier on. So how you're leading self is how you're going to be leading others. You need to be effective for yourself first. And my role and your role, if you're not able to hire a coach, is to ask people around you, how do you turn up as a leader? Are you an effective leader? How do you communicate? And you can ask those questions and get a quick understanding if people are being transparent with you, which they may not always be, but understanding how you're turning up and where you need to be versus where you should be. The reality of where you think you are as a leader is typically a lot different, and that's where the gap is, and that's where you have to address it. So I think it's about firstly getting the awareness and then slowly building those new habits that support that person being a better leader, which the person that they're working with to be a better leader. So it takes time, and it starts with awareness and then building new habits to support them to show up better for their people and for themselves.
How does somebody do that, Chris? Because if you don't have the sort of immersion that you've had in the amount of countries you visited, the cultures you've been around, how would somebody who hasn't had that same experience be able to connect with people, to influence them and lead them, to care about them on a real visceral level?
So it if you haven't had the ability to travel, and I think that's completely fine. Not a lot of people do have that. You can also just it comes by asking those questions. I think as you step into leadership and you become more comfortable with self, I think about myself as I became a new leader and the obstacles I had to overcome to be a successful one was that you take things personally and everything is an attack on you as a leader. Once you understand that and have a separation around that part of it, you can look as feedback as a roadmap moving forward rather than a roadblock. So look at feedback as a roadmap of where you are here versus where you want to be. So if you feel, and I know a lot of cases it's not, people are not going to recognize that they're not a human centric leader, right? You just don't wake up and say, I'm not a human centric leader anymore. You have to ask those questions. So I think it naturally comes from the people that you're working with, your direct reports, or the people in your circle that you have colleagues, leaders that you work in your same discipline, asking those simple questions around how do I show up? How do you believe that I act and behave as a leader? And I think that is the best way for you to start as your compass and then understand where you're at and versus where you need to be. And that just by simply asking some uncomfortable questions around people who see how you operate daily.
I was just going to talk about that uncomfort, because I can imagine it takes a high level of humility to ask those sort of questions of your subordinates. However, it also takes as much equal or more courage for subordinates to be honest about that. So how do you bridge those two gaps? How do you get people closer, both the manager and the associates? How do you get them closer together to be able to share authentically and with humility?
I think it comes from self. This is where self leadership for you, as someone who sits in that title of leadership, naturally people are going to gravitate towards you and see how you act and behave. So if you turn up every single day and act with the humility and act in a certain way, you then allow people to turn up in that same way. People are always going to look to you as a leader when the pressure is on in tough scenarios. Naturally, they're going to look at you and say, what do we need to do here? So that's the vehicle, is just by turning up and being an example to everyone else. If you allow yourself to be vulnerable and to show humility and say, Dwayne, I got that 100% wrong. You are 100% right in that. Thank you for calling that out. That allows people will see that from me as your leader and say, all right, I can have that same conversation with Patricia over there in the same department. We are now a vulnerable unit together. We can call each other out. We support each other, but we also recognize that we're wrong, and we support each other and we move forward and we challenge and support.
Do you think you would have this level of understanding and awareness to be able to influence other leaders if you didn't have the travel experience that you did?
Great question. Yeah, I don't think I've been asked that before. I think it just allowed it just naturally gave me the ability to be comfortable with myself and to put myself in those difficult conversations, but also feel that, and for anyone that's listening, is that the best way to learn leadership is by doing, by seeing yourself do the behavior. You can read all the different books in the world and think that you're going to be a great leader, but the best way to learn is by doing and see yourself doing it, because you're going to learn through fire and all the different mistakes you're going to make. that is the best way to learn. So I think it's a combination of travel was the vehicle that inspired me to become a leader, and then it shaped me through practice and through my own discipline, and continued travel has helped me to become more well-rounded as a leader.
I'm wondering now, so I agree with what you're saying. I'm just wondering how tangible it is for people to be aware of those things.
Hmm.
And I'll give you a for instance. There's somebody who I know who is a very disciplined athlete. I
Hmm.
mean, they are training all the time. They're constantly in the gym. They're constantly practicing. They're very disciplined. However, when it comes to relationships, they tend to drop the ball a lot,
Yeah.
right? They're not as consistent. They're not as responsible. But I always tell them, I say, if you have the ability to be disciplined in your athletics, you can transfer that discipline, that tool, that mechanism that you use towards this outcome. You can take that discipline and apply it to another outcome. But I don't know how many people are aware of some things that they're naturally doing every single day
Yeah.
can be translated into leadership
Hmm.
in their day-to-day life. So how do you help people understand and bridge those gaps that they may not be aware of?
Yeah, it's a great question because I can see it can be seen as very high level, right? And it's not relevant to me
Yeah.
because I don't sit in a leadership chair, or I don't hold the title, or I never have any interest of being a leader. But I'll come back to the point that we are all leaders in our own right. You don't need a leadership title to be a leader. Leadership is a verb, it's an action. So, how do you become a better leader? You start by understanding yourself and the way you can operate. So, simple exercises that you can do, and I know everyone's different. Reflection, journaling is one of the most powerful tools that I've definitely learned. It's something that I work on with different leaders as well. And we live in a society now where we have more tools than we ever had before. So you can use a simple self-reflection exercise through journaling. There's many different journaling options out there. I use the 5 minute journal for a handwritten journal version myself. It literally takes 5 minutes every single day for you to map out what am I grateful for? What do I want from today? And then at the end of each day, there's a prompt that says, what did you learn today? What are you going to focus on tomorrow? Just coming from a lens of being more grateful and understanding self and what you're working towards and what you've learned from today will enable you to have a better understanding of how you operate as an individual, and subsequently how you turn up as a leader. So there's a simple exercise you can do through journaling. And if you're not a handwritten journaler, you can also do this through ChatGPT. I also have a ChatGPT prompt that I've created for myself. I have a mantra that I read every single day. And then I have 3 questions that I ask myself. It prompts me. And then 3 questions to ask myself in the evening. It's an exercise I do every single day. So we have more information and tools than we've ever had before. So it just starts by taking those smaller actions to help you build out those tangible outcomes that you can walk towards. So I'd say simplifying it is the easiest way to help you get something tangible out of what you want to get as a person, firstly.
So give me an example. I'm curious now because I've heard journaling a lot.
Yeah.
Many of the guests that I've talked to have mentioned it in some capacity, and I don't know how prevalent it is among just people in general, but I do advocate for it, and I've been trying it my own. I haven't been as consistent as you or some others that have talked about it. But take us through like one thing, like what would be something you would journal and then you would be able to reflect on later on and say, I can use this and apply it to the way I'm leading and the way I'm influencing. What would be an example that maybe you or somebody
Yeah.
you've worked with can share?
I think journaling, when we think about it conceptually, it seems like you're writing down a lot of information. That will automatically put you in an analysis paralysis. That's too much for you to do, right? When you think about journaling, you're thinking of writing long-winded pages. It's as simple as asking those questions. And I think about an entry that I made yesterday. I asked, what did I learn about myself or something that I could have improved? You can keep it in the simplest form. What did I, and that enabled me to think about all the conversations that I had yesterday. And there was a conversation I distinctly remembered. It was the first day back at work. And I had a conversation with someone asking, how was my Christmas break? And I didn't handle that as well as I should have. I feel that in hindsight, at the end of the day, that I had this reflection that I wasn't as interested in the outcome of his story around what Christmas was versus what my story sharing was. So at the end of the day, I prompted myself to think about that. And I looked back and said, I didn't handle that as well as I should have. If that conversation now comes up in the future, unlikely in that scenario it'll come up, but giving people that time where I fell short, or at least I felt short on that, wouldn't have been able to be seen unless I took that time to reflect on it. And if you do that every single day and you think about the conversations or the interactions with colleagues and work, you will find something that will help you move forward every single day, I assure you. And that over time will naturally compound for you to be a lot more self aware around the conversations that you're having with yourself and also the people that are around you that matter.
You know, they say the eighth wonder of the world is compound. They talk about compounding interest, right?
Mhm.
So when you think about that little moment of reflection, it compounds into your ability to now there go out and connect with another person
Mhm.
and another person after that, maybe people that are in your charge. And you may just take one thing from that reflection, which would could be listen more intently. And as you're listening more intently, ask questions. That's it. Listen, ask. And it's so simple because you're not trying to rehearse or choreograph something in your next engagement. It's really taking away one thing that you can do that you recognize you may not have done before. Am I oversimplifying it, or is it?
You're 100%. And let's be real here. I'm sharing that. I'm a coach. I'm a coach and I have those conversations and I consider myself a highly curious, always listening, evoking out of conversations. But I just caught myself in that scenario that I've, upon reflection, that I should have done better. I should have done a lot better. So naturally, I believe I'm strong in that way. But for whatever reason, I didn't show up in that conversation. So that's the bridge that I'm building right there to identify that. So it is quite simplistic, but it's also identifying a pattern that for whatever reason I didn't turn up in that conversation when I truly believe I'm always curious as a coach and always evoking questions from other people. So it was a big awakening for me just to be aware of that with my first day back. Maybe I was too on holiday mode, I'm not sure, but it was I didn't turn up the way I should have.
Well, Chris, I have to ask, do you think self leadership is undervalued and maybe undertaught?
Yes, because it's self leadership. You have to be effective in leading yourself before you can lead others. The most important conversations we have are with ourselves. You are never
And the
gonna,
longest conversations.
yeah, right. And a lot of the longest we sit in our thoughts, we spend so much time. I remember reading a stat recently, 80% of the things that we think about never eventuate into things. Let that resonate.
Yeah,
80% of the things that we think about never eventuate,
yeah.
yet we're giving them so much time.
Hmm. Hmm. And it contributes to the depression and anxiety. I heard an old proverb that says, when you're living in the future, you're anxious. When you're living in the past, you're depressed. But when you're living in the present, you're at peace. And that's always stuck with me.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
love that.
made me really understand and really connect with my own thoughts in a lot of ways to be like, okay, I'm thinking about something, but A, can I control it?
Mm,
B, it hasn't happened and I don't know if it will happen. And C, it's not my thing to really tackle right now because it's only going to continue to make me spiral. I do by nature ruminate on things in the past. I'm a reflector,
I am as well.
sometimes to a fault.
Mm,
So I reflect on something so in depth that I break it down to the smallest atom until I'm comfortable moving forward.
mm,
And that to me is a risk sometimes because I can overanalyze something because I'm really trying to understand it. I'm trying to understand the tone that was used, the words that were used, the inferences that potentially that other person walked away with, or maybe, what I walked away with and why I'm thinking that way. So it's very challenging to be in the present, to be in peace, and to not be in that 80% of things that won't unfold because we're so in our heads a lot and trying to understand every little action and every little behavior that we interacted with and how that really is going to show up for us in the next day, which again we can't really, we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know what it's going to look like. So that is not surprising, and I know for myself, part of my self leadership is trying to understand how to not
yeah.
be in the future and not be in the past as much, but to really understand, to be present, be focused. And
Yeah.
I think one of the common things, you probably hear this a lot, is you're thinking about what you want to say to the person. How do you want to respond before they're finished their thoughts, right? That's a common one.
Yes. 100%. And I think that was a natural for any of the new leaders out there. I think that's a natural inclination that you make. I know when I first became a leader, was that you felt you had to be the smartest person in the room. And to your point, when someone is telling you something, you're trying to come up with the next answer. You're coming up with the solution rather than being present. But if you truly listen to someone, you're doing the work up front, which is the work that you needed to do, rather than the recovery work that you needed to do if you don't actually listen in the front part of it.
Thank you, Chris. This was great.